The locks always clicked from the outside, never in. Jade Owens had counted them 100 times from her bedroom window. 7 bolts on the front door, 5 on the back, 3 on the kitchen entry, 2 on the cellar. Her father checked them every night before retiring to his study, methodical as a watchmaker, and she would press her forehead against the cold glass and imagine what it felt like to turn a handle that actually opened. Tonight, she didn't imagine. Tonight she wrapped her knuckles in her scarf, punched through the painted shut latch on her window, and climbed out into fog so thick she couldn't see her own feet touching grass. She ran. No shoes, no coat despite the October cold, just her nightdress and the scarf, and 22 years of rage compressed into motion. The estate grounds stretched forever in the dark, manicured hedges looming like sentries. But she knew the gap in the iron fence from childhood explorations, back when her father still let her walk the gardens. The metal bit cold against her palms as she squeezed through, and then she was out, running down a road she'd only ever seen from behind glass. The world smelled like wet earth and freedom and terror. She didn't hear the footsteps. The fog swallowed sound the way it swallowed light. One moment she was running blind, the next she collided with something that felt like a marble column dressed in silk, and hands caught her shoulders before she could fall. "Steady." The voice rolled through the fog, low and ancient, and Jade looked up into a face that should not exist outside of paintings. White skin, luminous in the darkness, hair like spun silver falling past broad shoulders, eyes the color of winter storms, fixed on her with an intensity that made her forget to breathe. She knew what he was. Everyone knew. You didn't live in the modern world without knowing about the vampire courts that had revealed themselves a generation ago, the treaties and the territories and the elaborate dance of coexistence that kept the peace. You especially didn't forget when your father spent half his time in their halls, brokering deals and currying favor. But knowing was different from standing inches away from one, feeling the unnatural cold radiating from him, seeing the way he didn't blink or sway or show any of the tiny movements that made a person look alive. She should run. She should scream. She should do anything except stand there trembling while he studied her face with something that looked almost like concern. "Who hurt you?" The question broke something inside her chest, not "what are you doing" or "this is private property" or any of the challenges she'd expected. Just those 3 words, gentle as snowfall, and she realized she was crying. Her voice cracked. "No one. Everyone. I don't know." His hands were still on her shoulders, steadying her, and they didn't tighten or grab the way she'd learned to expect from men's hands. He just held her upright while she shook, and the fog pressed close around them like a curtain hiding the world. "You're bleeding." He released one shoulder to catch her hand, turning it to reveal the cuts from the window latch, dark blood welling through the scarf she'd wrapped around her knuckles. His nostrils flared slightly, but when he met her eyes again there was no hunger there, only a kind of patient waiting. "Will you tell me your name?" "Jade." She should lie. She should make something up. But the truth spilled out anyway, exhaustion overriding sense. "Jade Owens." Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of recognition followed by what might have been anger, though it passed too quickly for her to be sure. "Owens, Martin Owens' daughter. You know him." Of course he did. Her father knew every vampire of consequence within 200 miles, trading human cooperation for their favor, building a career on collaboration while keeping his own daughter locked away like a shameful secret. "I know him." The vampire's tone gave away nothing. "I am Silvius Ravenna, and I suspect your father would very much like you returned to him." Jade jerked backward, or tried to. His hand was still wrapped gently around her bleeding one, and he didn't release it, though he didn't pull her closer either. Please, I can't go back there. I can't. The door's locked from the outside. Do you understand? Every single one. I haven't been past the gates in 3 years, and before that only with guards, and he's planning to—" She stopped, swallowing against the panic rising in her throat. "Planning to what?" "Trade me." The words tasted like ash. "Some kind of marriage alliance with a vampire house, Lord Cassius of the Western Court. My father showed me the contract last week. I'm supposed to be presented at the autumn gathering like a prize mare, and Lord Cassius is twice my age and already has 3 wives. And I said no, I said I wouldn't. But my father said it didn't matter what I wanted because the agreement was already signed and— Breathe, Silvius said quietly. You're safe at this moment. Breathe. She dragged air into her lungs and realized she was clutching his hand like a lifeline, her blood smearing across his pale fingers. He didn't seem to notice or care. Lord Cassius is a fool, he said after a moment, and there was something dark threading through his voice now. But this is politics, not cruelty. Your father gains status through the connection. Cassius gains a young wife from a prominent collaborator family. No one consulted you because, in their view, you are the commodity being exchanged, not a participant in the negotiation. The casual way he laid out her objectification should have made her angrier, but instead, it felt like relief. No false comfort, no pretending this was anything other than what it was. I won't go, Jade said, and her voice came out stronger than she expected. I'll die first. I'll walk into the sun with you if that's what it takes. His mouth quirked, almost a smile, but not quite. Vampires burn in sunlight, humans only tan. Your threat needs work. Despite everything, she almost laughed. The sound came out broken, half sob, but it was something other than fear. Then I'll think of something better, but I won't go back to that house and I won't marry Lord Cassius. Silvius studied her for a long moment, fog curling around them both, and she had the strangest sense that he was weighing her entire life in that gaze. Finally he inclined his head, a gesture that looked oddly formal given they were standing on a dark road in the middle of nowhere. Then come with me. I can offer you sanctuary, at least for tonight. After that, he paused. After that we will see what can be done, but I will not drag you anywhere, and I will not make choices for you. If you come, it must be your decision. Jade looked back the way she'd run. Somewhere behind her in the fog was her father's house, the locked doors, the barred windows, the bedroom that had been her prison for years. Ahead of her was a vampire king. She knew his name now. Silvius Ravenna, the ruler of the Eastern Court, the one her father spoke of with mingled fear and ambition, offering her a choice. It wasn't really a choice at all. I'll come. He released her hand carefully, as though she were something fragile, and shrugged out of the long, dark coat he wore. It settled around her shoulders with surprising weight, silk-lined and still holding the cold of him. It's a short walk to where my car is waiting. Can you manage? She nodded, and he turned and began walking, not checking to see if she followed, but moving slowly enough that she could keep pace on her bare, frozen feet. The fog seemed to part before him, or maybe that was her imagination. The car was a sleek black thing that looked expensive even through the mist, parked on a wider road she didn't recognize. A driver stood beside it, another vampire by the look of him, the same pale skin, the same preternatural stillness, but he simply opened the back door when they approached, no questions asked. Silvius handed her into the seat with old-fashioned courtesy and settled beside her, leaving a careful foot of space between them. The interior smelled like leather and something else, something cold and faintly sweet that she couldn't name. The driver pulled away from the curb without a word. Where are we going? Jade asked. Her voice sounded small in the enclosed space. My home. The Eastern Court Hall is beneath the city, but I keep a residence above ground for human visitors and daytime business. You'll have your own room, your own key. No locks from the outside. His eyes found hers in the dim light filtering through tinted windows. I mean that. You can walk out any time you choose. Why would you help me? The question came out sharper than she intended. You said you know my father. You know he'll come looking for me. Why risk whatever alliance you have with him? Silvius was quiet for several heartbeats, watching the dark city roll past outside. When he spoke, his voice was measured, careful. Your father is useful to me. He smooths relations between my court and the human business sector, facilitates trade agreements, keeps certain political elements cooperative. But he is not my friend, and his usefulness does not extend to ignoring a young woman bleeding and terrified in the road. He turned back to her. I have lived a very long time, Jade Owens. I have seen what happens when powerful men treat their daughters as property. It never ends well for anyone. There was history in those words, old pain buried under centuries, but before Jade could find a way to ask about it, the car was pulling through tall iron gates and up a long drive. The house that emerged from the fog was Victorian, All dark stone and tall windows, elegant and imposing without being a castle. Lights glowed warm in several windows. "Staff?" she asked. "A few. All vampire, all loyal, all discreet." He climbed out and offered his hand to help her down. "They won't bother you unless you ask for something." Inside, the house was all dark wood and deep carpets, modern furniture mixing with antique pieces in a way that suggested centuries of accumulation rather than design. Silvius led her up a curved staircase to the second floor, down a hall lined with closed doors, and into a bedroom that looked like something from a luxury hotel. "The bathroom is through there," he said, nodding toward a half-open door. "There's a wardrobe with clothing that should fit reasonably well. I keep things on hand for guests. Help yourself to anything you need. I'll have food set up and medical supplies for your hands." Jade stood in the center of the room, his coat still draped around her, and tried to process the fact that an hour ago she'd been locked in her father's house, and now she was being offered sanctuary by a vampire king. It felt like a dream. It felt like a trap. It felt like the first real choice she'd made in years. "What happens tomorrow?" she asked. Silvius paused in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Tomorrow your father will realize you're missing. He will search. He will likely suspect I'm involved, or at least contact me to ask for help looking, and we will decide together how you want to respond." His voice softened slightly. "I meant what I said. I won't make your choices for you. Sleep if you can. You're safe here tonight." He was gone before she could answer, the door closing with a soft click. Jade stood alone in the elegant room and slowly let out the breath she'd been holding. Then she crossed to the door and tried the handle. It opened. She closed it again, locked it from the inside, unlocked it, opened it again. The hall outside was empty and quiet. She shut the door once more, and this time left it unlocked, just to prove to herself that she could. Her hands were shaking. She looked down at the bloodied scarf still wrapped around her knuckles and felt the night catch up with her all at once, exhaustion and relief and terror pouring through her in equal measure. She made it to the bathroom before her legs gave out, sinking onto the cool tile floor and crying in great gasping sobs that felt like they'd been trapped inside her for years. Eventually, the tears stopped. Eventually, she cleaned the cuts shallow, mostly, nothing serious, and washed her face and looked at herself in the mirror. Same dark eyes, same pale brown hair falling in tangles past her shoulders, same face she'd seen every day in her father's house. But something was different. Some light she'd thought was gone forever. The wardrobe held clothes in her size, simple and well-made, and she changed into soft sleep pants and a shirt that smelled like lavender. When she emerged, a tray had been left on the small table by the window, bread and cheese and fruit, a pot of tea still steaming, bandages and antiseptic beside it. She hadn't heard anyone enter. Vampires moved quietly. She ate because she was starving, bandaged her hands because the cuts stung, and then climbed into the bed that was softer than anything she'd slept on in years. The room had 2 windows, both unlocked, curtains open to show the fog pressing against the glass. She thought she wouldn't sleep. She thought she'd lie awake expecting her father to break down the door any moment. Instead, she dropped into unconsciousness like a stone into deep water and didn't wake until pale afternoon light was filtering through the fog outside. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it came back in a rush. The window, the running, the vampire king with his careful hands and his question that had broken her open. "Who hurt you?" She sat up, heart pounding, and found a note on the bedside table written in elegant script. "Good afternoon. Take your time. There's no rush and no one will disturb you. When you're ready, there's breakfast or, I suppose, lunch now waiting downstairs in the dining room. We should talk, but only when you feel able." S. Jade read it 3 times, looking for the threat hidden in the courtesy, but the words just said what they said. An invitation, not an order. A conversation deferred to her readiness. She dressed in clothes from the wardrobe jeans that fit well enough, a soft sweater, and ventured out into the hall. The house was quiet, morning quiet, the kind of stillness that felt peaceful rather than oppressive. She found the stairs and followed the scent of food to a dining room where sun streamed through tall windows. Silvius sat at the table reading a newspaper, a cup of something dark beside him. He looked up when she entered and rose immediately, that same old-fashioned courtesy. In the daylight filtering through heavy curtains, he looked even more unearthly, his white hair catching the light like frost, his features too perfect to be quite human. "You slept well, I hope," he said. "I did. I didn't think I would." Jade hovered in the doorway, uncertain. Can you be in the sun?" "Indirect light, yes. Through windows, especially treated ones like these. Direct sunlight is another matter." He gestured to the table where a spread of food waited: eggs, toast, fruit, coffee. "Please, sit." She did, and he settled back into his own chair, angling it slightly so he was facing her rather than the table. The cup beside him held blood, she realized. He didn't try to hide it. "Your father called an hour after dawn," Silvius said without preamble. He was frantic. His daughter was missing, had apparently broken a window to escape in the night, and he feared the worst. He asked if my patrols had seen anything, if I would help search. Jade's appetite vanished. "What did you tell him?" "That my patrols had indeed found a young woman on the roads late last night, injured and distressed, that I had offered her sanctuary and medical care, as is my obligation under the treaty laws, that she was safe and recovering, and that I would relay his concern when she was ready to receive it." "You told him I was here." "I told him you were safe. I did not confirm where, though he will assume." Silvius's expression was calm, but there was something watchful in his eyes. Lying to him would only delay the inevitable. He's already on his way here. He'll arrive within the hour. Panic shot through her. Ice cold. "You said I could leave whenever I wanted." "You can. Right now, if that's what you choose. I'll have a car take you anywhere you want to go, give you money, help you disappear if that's what you truly want." He leaned forward slightly. "But Jade, running will only last so long. Your father has resources, connections. He'll find you eventually, and when he does, you'll be alone and he'll be angry. If you want a permanent solution, you need to confront this." "I can't." Her voice came out strangled. "You don't understand what he's like. He'll drag me back, he'll lock me in, He will do nothing of the sort under my roof," Silvius said, and there was steel in his voice now, the first time she had heard real command in it. "You are my guest and under my protection. I have invited him here to talk, not to reclaim property. If you choose to see him, it will be in my presence, with my support. If you choose not to, I will tell him so and send him away." He paused. "But I think you should see him. I think you should tell him to his face that you will not be sold to Lord Cassius or anyone else. Let him hear it from you, here where you're safe. Give him a chance to respond like a father instead of a merchant. He won't care. He's never cared about what I want." "Perhaps, but you'll know you tried. And more importantly, I will witness it. These things matter in vampire law: witnesses, formal declarations. If your father refuses to release you from this arrangement, it becomes a matter I can take to the court." His eyes held hers. "You don't have to fight this alone. That's what I'm offering. Not another cage, an ally." Jade looked down at her hands, the bandages white against her skin. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to take his offer of money and a car and disappear into the city. But he was right. Running wouldn't solve this. Her father would find her, or the contract with Lord Cassius would stand, or both. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll see him. But you have to stay. Promise you'll stay." "I promise." Silvius's voice was gentle again. "You have my word, Jade. I won't leave you alone with him." She tried to eat after that, forcing down toast and fruit while Silvius returned to his paper, giving her silence to collect herself. The food sat heavy in her stomach. She kept glancing at the windows, half expecting to see her father's car already pulling up the drive. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. Silvius lowered the paper. "Of course. Why are you doing this? Really? I know you said you've seen this before, but that doesn't explain why you'd risk angering my father, potentially losing a useful ally for someone you just met." She met his eyes. "There has to be more to it." He was quiet for a long moment, and she thought he might deflect or refuse to answer. Then he set the paper aside entirely and folded his hands on the table. 300 years ago," he said slowly, "I had a daughter. Not by blood, vampires cannot have children that way, but I turned a young woman who'd been thrown out by her family for refusing an arranged marriage. She came to me asking for immortality, for freedom, for a life of her own choosing. I gave it to her. She was brilliant and fierce and everything a vampire should be. His voice was steady, but there was pain beneath it, old and deep. 50 years later, her human family tracked her down. They couldn't accept what she'd become. They killed her with fire and sunlight and self-righteousness, believing they were saving her soul. Jade's throat tightened. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago, but I learned something from it. I learned that there are some battles worth fighting even when they're not your own, some cruelties worth opposing even when it's inconvenient. He looked at her directly. When you collided with me last night, bleeding and terrified, asking me to let you die rather than go back, you reminded me of her, and I decided I would not fail someone again the way I failed her. The honesty of it stole her breath. This wasn't political maneuvering or empty chivalry. This was personal, painful, real. Thank you, she said, and meant it with everything she had. For telling me. For helping me. For... The doorbell rang, deep and sonorous through the house. Jade's hands clenched on the table. Silvius rose in one fluid motion and came around to her side, not touching but close enough that she could feel the cold radiating from him like an anchor. Breathe, he said quietly. Remember, you're safe here. He cannot touch you without going through me. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and stood on shaking legs. Silvius led the way out of the dining room, down a wide hall to the entrance foyer where the heavy front door was already being opened by a pale-haired vampire in a servant's neat suit. Martin Owens stood on the threshold, and the sight of him hit Jade like a physical blow. He looked older than she remembered, or maybe she'd just stopped seeing him clearly years ago. 50s, graying at the temples, expensive suit perfectly tailored, face set in lines of worry that almost looked genuine. His eyes found her immediately, and something that might have been relief flashed across his expression. Jade, thank God. He stepped forward. Silvius moved fractionally, not blocking him, but making his presence felt, and Martin stopped. His gaze shifted to the Vampire King, and his expression smoothed into something more careful, more political. Your Majesty, I can't thank you enough for taking her in, for keeping her safe. I've been out of my mind with worry. He looked back at Jade. Sweetheart, what were you thinking? You could have been killed, running off in the night like that. Anything could have happened. The endearment made her skin crawl. Don't call me that. Jade. I wasn't running into danger, Father. I was running from it. Her voice shook, but she forced the words out. From you, from that house, from the locks you put on the outside of every door so I couldn't leave. Martin's face hardened for a fraction of a second before the concerned father mask slid back into place. That's for your own protection. The world isn't safe for young women alone, especially women connected to the vampire courts. I've told you this. You've told me a lot of things. You told me the locks were temporary. You told me I'd have more freedom once I was older. You told me you were doing everything for my own good. Jade's hands were fists at her sides. Then last week you told me I was going to marry Lord Cassius whether I wanted to or not. So which is it, Father? Protection or property? This is not the place for this discussion, Martin said tightly. He looked at Silvius. Your Majesty, I apologize for my daughter's hysteria. This is a family matter. If you'll allow me to take her home, we can resolve it privately. No. The word came from Silvius, quiet but absolute. Martin blinked. What, I beg your pardon? Miss Owens is my guest, Silvius said, his tone courteous but with an edge like a blade underneath. She came to me seeking sanctuary, and I have granted it. She will leave this house when and if she chooses to, not before. If you wish to speak with her, you may do so here in my presence. Those are the terms. Martin's jaw tightened, but he was too smart to argue with the Vampire King in his own home. Of course, forgive me. I'm simply concerned for my daughter's well-being. Then perhaps we should all sit down and discuss that well-being, Silvius suggested. He gestured toward a sitting room off the foyer, spacious and comfortable with several chairs arranged around a low table. Come. It wasn't a request. They filed into the room, Silvius first, then Jade, then her father, who looked increasingly uncomfortable at being managed this way. Silvius took a chair and indicated that Jade should sit beside him, which she did gratefully. Martin sat across from them, posture perfect, hands clasped on his knees. Now then, Silvius said, let's speak plainly. Miss Owens objects to the marriage contract you've arranged with Lord Cassius. She believes, if I understand correctly, that she was not consulted and her wishes were not considered. Is this accurate?" Martin's expression flickered. "The marriage is advantageous for everyone involved. Lord Cassius is a respected member of the Western Court, wealthy, powerful, old enough to be her grandfather and already maintaining 3 other wives," Silvius interrupted mildly, "none of which addresses whether Jade consented. She's my daughter. It's my right to arrange a suitable marriage. By human law, she's an adult. She can refuse. By vampire law, a contract once signed is binding," Martin countered, and Jade saw the calculation in his eyes. "I signed on her behalf as her father and head of household. The agreement is legal." Silvius was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was colder than Jade had heard it. "You signed a contract promising your adult daughter in marriage without her knowledge or consent, using your status as her father to bind her to a vampire 3 times her age. And you believe this is defensible." "I believe it's already done. The contract is filed with the Western Court. Breaking it now would be an insult to Lord Cassius and a violation of my agreement. There would be consequences." "Then you should have thought of that before signing away another person's life," Jade said, and her father's gaze snapped to her. "I'm not doing it. I don't care what contract you signed. I won't marry him." "You'll do as you're told." "Or what?" The words burst out of her, years of swallowed anger finally surfacing. "You'll lock me up? You've already been doing that. You'll disown me? Go ahead. I don't want your name or your money or anything else from you. You want to know why I ran? Because you turned our home into a prison, because you treated me like an object to be traded, because you stopped being my father a long time ago, and I finally realized I was never going to get him back." Martin stood abruptly, his face flushing. "You ungrateful! Sit down!" Silvius hadn't raised his voice, but the command in it made Martin freeze mid-motion. The Vampire King's eyes had gone cold, ancient, utterly merciless. "You are in my home, speaking to a young woman under my protection. You will show respect or you will leave. Choose now." The room was silent except for Martin's harsh breathing. Slowly, he sank back into his chair, but his expression had gone ugly with suppressed rage. "This is your doing," he said to Silvius. "You're turning her against me, filling her head with—" "I am allowing her to speak freely, perhaps for the first time in years," Silvius said. "If that feels like a turning against you, I suggest you examine why." He leaned forward slightly. "Here is what will happen, Martin Owens. Your daughter is going to remain here under my protection until this matter is resolved. You will petition Lord Cassius to dissolve the marriage contract, citing changed circumstances or whatever excuse you prefer. If he demands compensation, you will pay it from your own resources. Jade will not be returned to your house, and she will not be forced into any marriage she does not freely choose. These are my terms." "You can't do this," Martin said, but there was desperation creeping into his voice now. "You can't just, she's my daughter, and you owe me. Have you forgotten the business I bring to your court, the alliances I've helped broker? Without my cooperation, half your human partnerships would collapse. Then I suppose I'll have to manage without them. You're willing to risk that? For her?" Martin's gesture toward Jade was dismissive, contemptuous. "She's no one, nothing, a foolish girl with romantic notions who doesn't understand how the world works." "I understand enough," Jade said quietly. "I understand you care more about your status in the vampire courts than you ever cared about me. I understand you'd sell me to buy favor with Lord Cassius. I understand the locks were never about keeping danger out. They were about keeping me in, keeping me controlled, making sure I'd be exactly what you needed when you needed it." Her voice broke, but she pushed through. "I understand I never had a father. I just had a jailer who shared my blood." Martin looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment she thought she saw something crack in his expression, guilt maybe, or grief for what they'd lost. But then it hardened again into cold anger. "You'll regret this," he said. "Both of you. The contract with Lord Cassius is binding, and he won't take kindly to its violation. He'll demand satisfaction, and when he does, he'll deal with me," Silvius said calmly. "I'm not afraid of Cassius, and I suspect once he understands the situation that he was being offered a bride who was held under lock and key by her own father, and never consented to the union, he may choose to withdraw quietly rather than be associated with such ugliness. Vampires prize many things, but we do have standards. You self-righteous? Martin bit off whatever he'd been about to say, breathing hard. Fine. Keep her. Ruin your alliance with me, risk Lord Cassius's wrath, all for a girl you met yesterday. But don't come crying to me when this decision costs you. He stood, and this time Silvius didn't stop him. Martin looked at Jade one last time, and his voice when he spoke was flat, empty. You are no daughter of mine. If you walk away from this family, you walk away permanently. There will be no reconciliation, no forgiveness. I hope he's worth it. Then he turned and strode out. The front door slammed behind him hard enough to rattle the windows. Jade sat frozen, her father's final words echoing in her head. You are no daughter of mine. She'd expected it to hurt more. Instead, she felt oddly hollow, like something had been cut out of her, but the wound was too clean to bleed. Jade, Silvius's voice was gentle. Are you all right? I don't know. She looked down at her hands. Should I be? He just disowned me. I'm homeless. I have nothing. You have your freedom. Silvius shifted his chair slightly closer. And you're not homeless. This house is yours as long as you need it, longer if you wish. He paused. Your father is wrong about many things, but he was right about one. Lord Cassius will not be pleased when the contract is broken. We need to prepare for that. What will he do? Demand compensation, most likely. Your father signed a binding agreement, and breaking it has consequences under vampire law. Cassius will claim damages loss of the promised alliance, insult to his status, whatever he can argue for. Silvius's expression was thoughtful. The problem is, your father does owe me. Not for this, but for an old matter. A blood debt from years ago, when I protected his business interests during a territory dispute. He's never formally repaid it, and if he calls it in now, claims that my harboring you violates the terms of our alliance and demands I return you as payment. He trailed off. Jade's stomach dropped. Can he do that? Legally, yes. A blood debt is one of the oldest forms of obligation in vampire law. If he invokes it, I'm bound to honor it unless I can find grounds to refuse. So I'm trapped anyway. The bitterness in her voice surprised her. I ran from one cage into another. No. Silvius's hand covered hers, cool and steady. We find a way to dissolve the debt, or we find a legal counterclaim, or we take the matter to formal court and argue it before the assembled houses. There are options, Jade. I won't let you be traded like property, debt, or no debt. Why? She turned to face him fully. Why does this matter so much to you? I'm grateful, I am, but you barely know me. You're risking so much. Because 300 years ago I failed someone who needed help, and I swore I wouldn't make that mistake again, Silvius said. Because you deserve better than to be locked away and sold. Because... He stopped, something shifting in his expression. Because in the 12 hours I've known you, you've shown more courage than most people manage in a lifetime. You broke yourself free, you spoke truth to your father's face, and you're still fighting. That matters to me. The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. There was something there beyond duty or old grief, something newer and more fragile that she didn't have words for yet. Thank you, she whispered. He released her hand slowly, as though reluctant. You should rest. This has been a difficult morning. I have some matters to attend to. I need to reach out to a few contacts, see what can be done about the contract and the debt. We'll talk more tonight. Jade nodded and stood, suddenly exhausted despite the sleep she'd gotten. Silvius walked her to the stairs, his presence a steady comfort beside her. Jade, he said as she started up, what your father said at the end that you're no daughter of his. He meant it to hurt you, don't let it. You're better off without a family that treats you as currency. I know, she said. It's just, he's all I had. For my whole life, it was just him and me after my mother died. And I kept thinking, maybe if I was patient enough, good enough, he'd remember how to love me. But he never did he? Maybe he never could. Silvius's expression was unbearably sad. Some people are too consumed by their own ambitions to have room for love. That's his failure, not yours. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and climbed the stairs to her borrowed room. Inside, she closed the door and stood in the afternoon quiet, trying to process everything that had happened. Free. She was free of her father, free of his house, free of the life he'd planned for her. But the freedom was fragile, contingent on Silvius's protection and the resolution of debts and contracts she didn't fully understand. and underneath the relief was a current of fear. What if Lord Cassius wouldn't let her go? What if the blood debt forced Silvius to send her back? What if this brief taste of choice was all she'd ever get? She spent the afternoon in her room, unable to settle. She tried reading from the small library of books on the shelf, tried watching the fog roll past the windows, tried sleeping again, but nothing worked. Her mind kept circling back to Silvius, the way he'd stood between her and her father, the promise in his voice when he said he wouldn't let her be traded, the look in his eyes when he'd said she mattered to him. She barely knew him. 24 hours ago, she hadn't known he existed as anything more than a name her father mentioned. Now he was the only solid thing in her crumbling world, and she was terrified of how much she was already relying on him. Evening came, the fog darkening to gray and then black outside. A soft knock at her door made her jump. "Miss Owens," a woman's voice, accented, polite. "Dinner's ready if you'd like to come down. His Majesty is waiting." Jade opened the door to find a vampire woman with the same pale skin and hair, wearing a simple black dress. She smiled, small and professional. "I'm Alara. I manage the household. If you need anything during your stay, please ask." "Thank you," Jade said. "Is Silvius His Majesty, does he eat? I mean, food, not usually, but he'll often sit with guests. He's in the dining room." Alara's smile warmed slightly. "He's in a good mood, if that helps. Whatever he's been working on today, I think it went well." That was something at least. Jade followed Alara downstairs to find the dining room lit with candles now, the curtains drawn against the night. Silvius stood by the window, a glass of blood in hand, and turned when she entered. "Jade." "Good evening." He gestured to the table, where another spread of food waited: soup, bread, roasted vegetables, things that smelled like comfort. "I hope you're hungry." "A little." She sat, and he took the chair across from her, angling it the way he had that morning so they could talk easily. "Alara said you had a good day." "A productive one, at least." He set down his glass. "I reached out to a few allies in the Western Court, people who know Lord Cassius and his temperament. The consensus is that he'll be angry about the broken contract, but he's also pragmatic. If we can offer him a compelling reason to withdraw something that lets him save face and avoid association with a scandal, he may take it." "What kind of reason?" "The truth, framed correctly. That you were held under lock and key, that you never consented, that the marriage would have been a form of coercion. Cassius is old-fashioned in many ways, but he prides himself on honor. Being seen as party to an unwilling bride might be worse for his reputation than losing the alliance." Jade felt a flicker of hope. "And the blood debt? The one my father could call in?" Silvius's expression tightened. "That's more complicated. I've been going through the records, trying to find a loophole or a counterclaim. The problem is, the debt is legitimate. I did protect your father's interests during the territory dispute, and he never formally repaid me. If he invokes it now, I'm obligated to honor it, unless..." He stopped. "Unless what?" "Unless he violated the terms of our alliance first. Blood debts are binding, but they rest on mutual good faith. If I can prove your father broke that faith, the debt is void." Silvius leaned forward. "Tell me about the locks, Jade. Exactly how long have you been confined?" 3 years completely. Before that, he started restricting where I could go, who I could see. It got worse gradually, and then one day he just stopped unlocking the doors from the inside. Said it was temporary for my safety, but it never stopped." "And did he ever tell anyone in the vampire courts about this? Mention it in negotiations or formal settings?" Jade thought back, trying to remember her father's phone calls, the few times she'd overheard him talking business. "No. He always said I was delicate, needed quiet, but he made it sound like I chose to stay home, like I was shy or fragile, not imprisoned. So he lied. To me, to the courts, to Lord Cassius." Silvius's voice was quiet, but there was satisfaction beneath it. "When he brokered your marriage contract, he represented you as a willing participant from a respectable household. He didn't disclose that you were being held against your will, that your consent was never asked for." "That's fraud, Jade. That's a violation of the treaty laws that govern human vampire negotiations." "Can you prove it?" "You're the proof. Your testimony, the injuries from breaking out, the locked doors themselves, I can have investigators document everything. And if your father lied about the circumstances of the marriage contract, he acted in bad faith. That voids the blood debt. Silvius's eyes were bright now, fierce. We take this to formal court. We lay out the facts. We make him answer for what he did. And we get you free of all of it, the contract, the debt, everything. Jade's heart was pounding. When? I'll petition for an emergency session. Given the nature of the accusations, the court will convene quickly within a few days, most likely. You'll need to testify. You'll need to stand before the assembled vampire houses and tell them what your father did. Can you do that? Terror and exhilaration warred in her chest. Standing in front of a room full of vampires, accusing her father publicly, laying out years of humiliation and control, it sounded like a nightmare, but it also sounded like justice. Yes, she said, I can do that. Silvius smiled, and it transformed his face, made him look almost human for a moment. Good. Then we fight. Together. They talked through the evening, Silvius explaining the court procedures, what she'd need to say, how the questioning would work. He was patient and thorough, answering every question she had, never making her feel stupid for not understanding vampire politics. At some point, Alara brought tea, and then later cleared the table while they moved to the sitting room, still talking. It was the most conversation Jade had had in years. Her father had never talked to her like this, like an equal, like someone whose thoughts mattered. Silvius listened when she spoke, considered her ideas, built on them. It was intoxicating. Can I ask you something personal? She said during a lull. Of course. Earlier you mentioned your daughter, the one who... She trailed off, not sure how to phrase it. The one who was killed, Silvius finished quietly. Yes. What do you want to know? What was her name? He was silent for a moment, and she thought maybe she'd overstepped. Then he said, Mirella. She was Romanian, turned during the wars when her family tried to marry her off to an enemy officer to secure peace. She refused, they threw her out, and she found her way to me. His voice was soft with old affection. She had your courage, your fire. She would have liked you. I wish I could have met her. So do I. Silvius looked at her, and there was something vulnerable in his expression now. The ancient vampire king stripped back to just a man who'd lost someone he loved. You remind me of her, but you're not her. I want you to know that. I'm not helping you because you're a replacement for what I lost. I'm helping you because you deserve help, because you're yourself. I know, Jade said, though she hadn't been sure until he said it. But I'm glad, I'm sorry she died, but I'm glad you had her, that you've loved people. It makes you less, she gestured vaguely, less terrifying, less alone. Silvius's expression softened. I've been alive a very long time, Jade. I've loved and lost more people than I can count. After a while you learn to guard yourself, to keep distance. But every so often someone comes along who makes you remember what it's like to care again. He held her gaze. You're one of those people. The air between them felt charged, heavy with things unsaid. Jade's pulse was loud in her ears. She should say something, acknowledge what he'd just confessed. But the words tangled on her tongue. I should let you sleep, Silvius said finally, standing. The next few days will be difficult, and you need rest. Jade rose as well, disappointed and relieved in equal measure. Thank you. For everything. For today, for listening, for... You don't need to thank me, he said. Just promise me you'll keep fighting. Keep being exactly as brave as you've been. That's all I ask. She promised, and he walked her to the stairs again, that same careful courtesy. At the top she turned back and found him still watching, his pale figure a ghost against the dark wood of the foyer. Good night, Silvius. Good night, Jade. She dreamed that night of locked doors that opened one by one, each revealing a different room bathed in light. In the last room stood Silvius, hand extended, and when she took it, his skin was warm instead of cold, human instead of vampire. She woke with the sun filtering through fog and the memory of that warmth still tingling in her palm. The next 2 days passed in a strange suspended tension. Silvius was often busy, making arrangements for the court session, gathering evidence, speaking to allies. But he made time for meals with her, for long conversations in the evening, for showing her around the house and grounds. She learned that he'd been a minor noble before he was turned, that he'd built his court slowly over centuries through diplomacy rather than conquest, that he collected old books and had a weakness for terrible human coffee. She learned that his laugh was rare but lovely, that he played piano sometimes late at night when he thought no one was listening, that he treated his staff with respect, and they were loyal to him in return. She learned the way his expression shifted when he looked at her, guarded turning to open, distant becoming fond. And she learned that she was falling for him, this ancient vampire king who'd asked who hurt you and then moved heaven and earth to make sure no one could hurt her again. It terrified her. It had been 3 days. She barely knew him. The power imbalance was absurd. He was royalty, immortal, impossibly old, and she was a human girl with nothing to her name. But when he smiled at something she said, when he listened to her rambling thoughts about books or the fog or anything at all, when he said her name in that careful, gentle way, she felt seen, valued, real. On the 3rd night, the summons came. The court would convene the following evening to hear the case of Jade Owens versus Martin Owens, with Lord Cassius of the Western Court to answer regarding the marriage contract. All parties were required to attend. "Are you ready?" Silvius asked. They were in his study, a book-lined room that smelled like old paper and candle wax. Rain pattered against the windows outside. "No," Jade said honestly, "but I'm going to do it anyway. That's all readiness really is, doing the thing despite the fear." He came around the desk to stand beside her. "I'll be there the entire time. You won't be alone." "I know." She looked up at him, this impossibly beautiful creature who'd become impossibly important to her. "Can I tell you something?" "Anything. I'm glad I ran into you. That night in the fog. I'm glad it was you." Silvius's hand came up slowly, carefully, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he brushed a strand of hair back from her face, his cool fingers feather-light against her skin. "So am I," he said quietly. "More glad than I can explain." For a moment they just stood there, close enough that she could see the fine details of his face, the way his eyes weren't pure gray but flecked with silver, the almost invisible lines at the corners that suggested he'd smiled often before he was turned. She wondered what it would be like to kiss him, whether his mouth would be as cold as his hands, whether he stepped back the moment breaking. "You should rest. Tomorrow will be a long night." Right. The court. The testimony. Her father and Lord Cassius in a room full of vampire nobility judging whether she deserved her freedom. She'd almost forgotten. "Will you play something?" she asked impulsively. "On the piano. I've heard you at night and it's beautiful." Silvius looked surprised, then pleased. "If you'd like." He led her to a music room she hadn't seen before, dominated by a grand piano that gleamed black in the lamplight. He sat and considered for a moment, then began to play. The music was achingly lovely, something classical she didn't recognize, all cascading notes and sweet melancholy. Jade curled into a chair nearby and listened, watching his hands move over the keys with the same precise grace he brought to everything. This close, she could see the way his expression softened as he played, the mask of the vampire king falling away to reveal someone gentler, sadder, more human. When the piece ended, the silence felt sacred. "That was beautiful," Jade whispered. "Chopin, Nocturne in E-flat major. I learned it when it was new." He smiled faintly. "Everything I play is old to everyone but me. Play something else, please." He did, piece after piece, and she let the music wash over her and thought about tomorrow, about standing in front of the court and telling her truth, about what happened after, if they won, about whether there was a future where she could stay here, with Silvius, learning all the other things he could teach her, not just about vampire politics or old music, but about what it meant to be seen, to be valued, to be loved. Eventually, she fell asleep in the chair, lulled by the piano and the rain, and the sense of safety she'd never known before. She woke hours later to find herself in her bed, tucked in carefully, with no memory of being carried. On the nightstand was a note in Silvius's elegant script. "You looked peaceful. I didn't have the heart to wake you. Sleep well. Tomorrow we win. S." She pressed the note to her chest and let herself believe him. The vampire court met in a chamber beneath the city, accessible only through a hidden entrance in an old cathedral's crypt. Silvius drove her there himself as sunset stained the sky red, his car sliding through streets slick with rain. "The session will be formal," he said as they descended stone steps into the earth. "Very old world in its protocols. Don't let that intimidate you. Just tell the truth clearly and directly. Answer what you're asked. Don't volunteer extra information, and look at the judges when you speak." "How many judges?" "5. Representatives from the major courts: Eastern, Western, Southern, Northern, and Central. I won't be one of them since I'm involved in the case, but they're all people I know. They're fair." He glanced at her. "Mostly." The chamber was vast, carved from living rock and lit with hundreds of candles in iron sconces. A long table sat at one end, 5 high-backed chairs behind it waiting for the judges. Rows of seats faced the table, already filling with vampires, all pale-skinned and white-haired, dressed in clothes that ranged from modern suits to things that looked centuries old. The air hummed with power and age. Jade's courage nearly failed. Silvius's hand found the small of her back, steadying her. "You belong here," he murmured. "You have every right to seek justice. Remember that." A side door opened, and her father walked in accompanied by a vampire. Jade didn't recognize his lawyer, presumably. Martin's face was stone when he saw her. No acknowledgement, no emotion. He took a seat on the opposite side of the chamber. Another door, another entrance. This time the vampire who entered made the others look ordinary. He was tall and coldly beautiful, white hair bound back in a style from another century, dripping with wealth and arrogance. Lord Cassius, Jade realized. He looked at her once, a flicker of curiosity in ancient eyes, then dismissed her and sat. The judges filed in last, 5 vampires who looked carved from marble, ageless and remote. They took their seats, and the room fell silent. The eldest, a woman with hair like moonlight and eyes like black ice, spoke. "This emergency session of the assembled courts is called to order. We are here to examine the petition of Silvius Ravenna, King of the Eastern Court, regarding the case of Jade Owens, human, versus Martin Owens, human collaborator, in the matter of a disputed marriage contract with Lord Cassius Theron of the Western Court. All parties present?" "Present," Silvius said from beside Jade. "Present," Martin's lawyer said. "Present," Lord Cassius said, sounding bored. "Then we begin. Silvius Ravenna, state your petition." Silvius stepped forward, and his voice rang clear through the chamber. "Honored judges, I petition for the immediate nullification of the marriage contract between Jade Owens and Lord Cassius Theron on the grounds of fraud and coercion. I further petition for the dissolution of the blood debt owed to me by Martin Owens on the grounds that he acted in bad faith and violated the terms of our alliance. I present as evidence Miss Owens herself, who was held against her will by her father for 3 years and whose consent to the marriage was never sought. I ask that the court hear her testimony and render judgment accordingly." The lead judge nodded. "The petition is noted. Martin Owens, how do you respond?" Martin stood, his lawyer beside him. "This is an internal family matter, Your Honors. My daughter is young and impressionable. She has been unduly influenced by His Majesty Silvius Ravenna, who has harbored her in direct violation of my parental authority and the blood debt he owes me. I demand her return and the enforcement of the existing marriage contract, which was entered into legally and in good faith." "And Lord Cassius?" The ancient vampire rose languidly. "I agreed to the marriage contract based on representations made by Martin Owens regarding his daughter's character and consent. If those representations were false, the contract is void, and I withdraw my claim. However, I expect compensation for the insult and the time wasted. Noted. Jade Owens, approach." Jade's legs were shaking, but she walked forward to stand before the judge's table, 5 pairs of ancient eyes fixed on her, weighing, measuring. She felt like an insect under glass. "You claim you were held against your will," the lead judge said. "Explain." So Jade did. She told them about the locks that clicked from the outside, the windows that wouldn't open, the 3 years of confinement. She told them about her father's increasing restrictions, the way he'd cut her off from friends in school and any life beyond the house. She told them about the contract he'd shown her, the marriage he'd arranged without asking, the trade he'd planned to make with her life. Her voice shook at first, but as she spoke, it grew stronger. This was her truth. This was what had been done to her. And these vampires, ancient and powerful and alien as they were listening. When she finished, the chamber was silent. "You have evidence of the locks?" one of the judges asked. Silvius stepped forward with a folder. "Photographs taken by my investigators 2 days ago. The doors of Martin Owens's house showing external bolts on all exits. Testimony from neighbors who hadn't seen Miss Owens outside in years. Medical documentation of the injuries she sustained breaking through a window to escape." The judges passed the folder between them, examining the contents. Jade watched her father's face drain of color. "Martin Owens," the lead judge said, "did you confine your daughter as she claims?" "For her own protection," Martin said tightly. "The world is dangerous. I was keeping her safe." "From what?" From unsuitable influences. From people who would take advantage of her. From having a life of her own." The judge's tone was ice. "You locked a grown woman in your house and called it protection. Then you signed a contract promising her in marriage without her knowledge. Do you deny this?" Martin's jaw worked. "The marriage was for her benefit. Lord Cassius is powerful, wealthy." "And I was never asked," Jade said, her voice cutting through his excuses. "I'm standing right here, and you're still talking about me like I'm not a person, like I'm something you own. You're my daughter. I was your daughter. You made sure I'm not anymore." The lead judge raised a hand for silence. She looked at Lord Cassius. "You withdraw your claim to the contract?" "Entirely," Cassius said. "I have no interest in a bride who was held prisoner and never consented. It's beneath my dignity and hers. Martin Owens misrepresented the situation. I consider the contract void." "And the matter of compensation?" Cassius waved a dismissive hand. "Let Owens pay court fees for wasting our time. I require nothing else." The judges conferred quietly among themselves. Finally, the lead judge spoke. "The court finds as follows. The marriage contract between Jade Owens and Lord Cassius Theron is declared null and void, entered into under false pretenses and without the bride's consent. Jade Owens is released from any and all obligations under said contract. Furthermore, we find that Martin Owens acted in bad faith in his dealings with both Lord Cassius and King Silvius Ravenna. The blood debt owed to King Silvius by Martin Owens is hereby dissolved, nullified by Owens's fraudulent conduct. Martin Owens will pay court costs and is formally censured for his actions. This matter is closed." The gavel came down, and Jade felt her knees give out. Silvius caught her, his arms strong and steady, and she leaned into him and tried to remember how to breathe. Free. She was free. The contract was void. The debt was gone. She didn't have to go back, didn't have to marry Lord Cassius, didn't have to be property ever again. "It's over," Silvius murmured against her hair. "You did it. It's over." She looked up at him and saw pride in his eyes, and something deeper, warmer. Then she looked past him to where her father stood, the lawyer packing papers away while Martin stared at nothing. For a moment she thought about going to him, saying something goodbye, or "I'm sorry," or "I wish things had been different." But what was there to say? He'd made his choices. She'd made hers. They were done. Instead, she let Silvius guide her out of the chamber, through the watching crowd of vampires, up the stone steps into the cool night air. The rain had stopped, and stars were breaking through the clouds. "What happens now?" she asked. Silvius looked down at her, his hand still at her waist. "That depends. You're free, Jade. Completely free. You can go anywhere, do anything. I meant what I said about the house being yours as long as you need it, but if you want to leave, start fresh somewhere else, I'll help you do that. And if I don't want to leave?" His expression shifted, hope flickering beneath the careful control. "Then you stay. For as long as you like. No obligations, no expectations. Just stay." Jade's heart was pounding. This was the moment, the choice she'd been circling around for days, too afraid to name it. She could walk away, build a normal human life, find safety in distance and forgetting. Or she could stay with a vampire king who'd fought for her freedom, who played Chopin in the dark, who looked at her like she was something precious. It wasn't really a choice at all. "I want to stay," she said. "With you." if that's what you want too. Jade, he said her name like a prayer. I've wanted that since the moment you collided with me in the fog, and I realized you were the bravest person I'd met in centuries, but I need you to be sure. I'm not human. I can't offer you a normal life. I'm cold and I'm old, and I come with complications you can't imagine. I don't want normal, Jade said. Normal locked me in a house and tried to trade me like cattle. I want real. I want honest. I want someone who sees me as a person, not property. And that's you, Silvius. That's what you've been from the beginning. He cupped her face in his cool hands, and his eyes were blazing. I can't promise forever. I'm immortal and you're human, and that means one day I'll lose you the way I've lost everyone else I've cared about. But I can promise right now, and all the days between now and then, I can promise that you'll never be locked in, never be trapped, never be anything but free and valued. And he stopped, something vulnerable crossing his face. And loved. If you'll have me. Yes. Jade rose on her toes and kissed him, and his mouth was cool as marble, but his response was warm, human, tender. He kissed her like she was fragile and fierce all at once, like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking for 300 years. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. Come home, he said softly. Let me show you what it's like to live in a house with no locks. So she did. The weeks that followed were strange and wonderful, an adjustment period where Jade learned what freedom actually meant. She could walk out the front door whenever she wanted. She could go into the city, explore, meet people, do anything that occurred to her. The first few times she did it alone, just to prove to herself that she could, her hands shook on the door handle. But it got easier. She enrolled in online classes, starting the education she'd been denied. She made friends with Alara and the other household staff, learning about vampire culture from the inside. She spent long evenings with Silvius, talking about everything and nothing, learning the shape of his mind and heart, and slowly, carefully, they built something together. A relationship that was strange by any conventional measure, human and vampire, mortal and immortal, a girl barely free and a king who'd seen empires rise and fall. But it worked. They worked. Silvius was endlessly patient with her fears and the trauma that surfaced in unexpected ways. He never pushed, never demanded, just offered steady presence and the promise that she could set every boundary and he'd respect them all. Jade learned what it was like to be touched with gentleness, to be listened to be wanted for herself rather than for what she could provide. They made love for the first time on a night 3 months after the court session, slow and tender in Silvius's bed while rain pattered against the windows. Afterward, wrapped in his cool arms, Jade felt something inside her finally settle the last piece of fear letting go. Yum, I love you, she said into the darkness. I know it's fast and maybe it's just gratitude or... It's not, Silvius said quietly. And I love you too. I've loved you since you stood in front of the vampire court and told your truth without flinching. Maybe before that. Maybe since you asked me to let you walk into the sun rather than go back to being caged. Jade turned in his arms to face him. What do we do? I'm human. I'm going to age and you're not. I'm going to die and you're going to keep living. How do we have now, Silvius said. We have today and tomorrow and all the days until we don't anymore. Some people get a lifetime together. We might get 50 years, 60 if we're lucky. That's more than many people ever have. And when the time comes, if you want... He hesitated. If you want to be turned, to choose immortality, I would give that to you. But it's your choice, Jade. It will always be your choice. The offer hung in the air between them. Huge and terrifying and thrilling, to become what he was, to live forever or as close to it as anything got, to never have to leave him. I don't know, she whispered. I need time to think about it. Then take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. She kissed him, pouring everything she felt into it, love and gratitude and wonder that this was her life now, that she'd climbed out a window and run into the fog and found him, found this. The seasons changed. Winter came, and Jade spent her first Christmas in years actually celebrating, decorating Silvius's house with Alara's amused help while he watched and made dry comments about mortal traditions. She gave him a first edition of a book he'd mentioned loving, and he gave her a bracelet of silver and sapphires that had belonged to Morella. "She would want you to have it," he said when Jade protested it was too much. "She'd want someone to wear it who understood what it meant to fight for freedom." Spring followed, and Jade started volunteering at a shelter for women escaping domestic violence, using her story to help others find their way out. It was hard raking up the past, but it felt important, purposeful. Silvius supported her completely, sometimes picking her up after her shifts and listening while she processed the day's pain and small victories. Summer brought an invitation. Lord Cassius was hosting a gathering, and he'd specifically asked that Jade and Silvius attend. It was an olive branch, Silvius explained, a formal acknowledgement that there were no hard feelings about the voided contract. "Do I have to go?" Jade asked. "No, but it might be good politics." And he did withdraw his claim without a fight. "We owe him some courtesy." So they went, Jade in a dress that made her feel like royalty, and Silvius in formal attire that made him look even more like the king he was. The gathering was elaborate, hundreds of vampires and their human companions filling Lord Cassius's estate. Jade was nervous at first, but Silvius never left her side, introducing her as his partner with quiet pride. Lord Cassius himself found them midway through the evening, a glass of something dark in hand. "Miss Owens, Your Majesty, I'm glad you could come." "Lord Cassius," Jade said, proud that her voice stayed steady, "thank you for the invitation." "I wanted to apologize," Cassius said, which surprised her. "For my part in the contract, I should have done more research, should have insisted on meeting you before signing. I don't make a habit of acquiring unwilling brides, and I regret that I nearly did so in your case." "I thank you," Jade managed. "I appreciate that." "You're well?" His ancient eyes studied her. "Happy?" She glanced at Silvius, who was watching her with that soft expression he got sometimes, the one that made her heart flip. "Very," she said. "Good. Then I can stop feeling quite so guilty." Cassius raised his glass in a small salute. "Be well, Miss Owens. You fought for yourself admirably. Not many have that strength." He drifted away into the crowd, and Jade let out a breath. "That was unexpected." "He's not a bad person," Silvius said, "just old and set in his ways. You surprised him. People like us, we forget sometimes that humans can be just as fierce as vampires." "People like you," Jade corrected gently. "I'm still human. For now." The words were careful, neutral, but they carried weight. Jade had been thinking about it more and more, the offer he'd made, the choice to turn or stay mortal. She wasn't ready yet, but she was getting closer to ready, circling the idea like a difficult conversation she knew she'd have eventually. Autumn came around again, a year since she'd broken out of her father's house. Jade woke on the anniversary to find Silvius already awake beside her, watching her with those storm-gray eyes. "Good morning," she murmured. "A year ago today, you collided with me in the fog," he said quietly. "Did you ever imagine we'd end up here?" "Not even a little bit." She curled closer to him, savoring his coolness against her warmth. "I thought you'd either kill me or send me back. I never dreamed you'd—" She gestured at the bedroom, the life they'd built. "All of this." "I couldn't let you go," Silvius said. "From the moment I saw you, bleeding and terrified but still fighting, I couldn't imagine just walking away. You changed something in me, Jade, reminded me what it was to care about someone more than politics or power or any of it." "I love you," she said, because it was the only response that felt big enough. "I love you too," he kissed her forehead. "I have something for you. An anniversary gift, if you will." He got up and retrieved a small box from the dresser, bringing it back to bed. Inside was a key, simple silver, slightly worn. "It's the key to this house," Silvius said, "specifically to the front door, though it works on all of them. I'm giving it to you so you know this is your home, not because I'm allowing it, but because it's yours. You belong here, for as long as you want to be here, and you can lock and unlock any door anytime you choose." Jade's eyes burned with tears. It was such a small thing, a key, but it meant everything: autonomy, choice, trust. She closed her fingers around it. "Thank you," she whispered. "There's more," Silvius said carefully. "I've been thinking about what comes next, for us. You're 23 now. You have your whole life ahead of you, and I meant what I said about not pressuring you to turn. But I want you to know that if you never choose that, if you want to live and age and die as a human, I'll be with you every step of the way. And when you're gone, I'll mourn you, but I'll be grateful for whatever time we had. You don't owe me immortality, Jade. You don't owe me anything except honesty about what you want." Jade sat with that for a long moment, turning the key over in her hands. A year ago, she'd had no choices. Now she had all of them, and it was overwhelming and beautiful and terrifying. "I think I want to be turned," she said slowly. "Not now. Not yet. I want a few more years as human, finish my degree, do the work at the shelter, make sure I've really lived this life before I leave it behind. But eventually, yes. I want forever with you, Silvius. I want to see what the world looks like 100 years from now, 200, with you beside me. I want to be your partner, not just your mortal companion who's going to leave you alone again." His expression cracked open with relief and joy. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." She set the key aside and took his face in her hands. "I've never been more sure of anything. You gave me my freedom. Let me choose to spend it with you." He kissed her then, deep and fierce, and they made love in the morning light with the promise of forever between them, like a third presence. Afterward, tangled together, Jade felt that sense of rightness again. This was where she belonged. With him. In this house with unlocked doors and windows that opened. In this life she'd chosen for herself. The years that followed were good. Jade finished her degree, started working full-time at the shelter, and then eventually opened her own nonprofit, helping young women escape abusive situations. Silvius supported her work completely, donating funds and resources, even offering sanctuary in his properties for women who needed a safe place to hide. She met with her father once more, 3 years after the court session. He was older, grayer, diminished somehow. His alliance with the vampire courts had never recovered from the scandal, and he'd fallen from prominence. They met in a neutral coffee shop, and it was awkward and painful and necessary. "I don't forgive you," Jade told him. "I don't know if I ever will. But I don't hate you anymore either. I just pity you. You traded your daughter for status, and you ended up with neither." Martin looked at her with tired eyes. "I thought I was doing what was best for both of us." "No, you did what was best for you. That's all it ever was." She stood to leave, then paused. "I'm happy now. I'm doing work that matters. I have people who love me. I have a life I actually chose. I wanted you to know that. What you did didn't break me. It just taught me what strength looked like." She left him there and didn't look back. That chapter was closed. On her 30th birthday, Silvius took her to the coast, to a house he owned that looked out over the ocean. They walked the beach at sunset, and he asked her again if she was ready. "Yes," Jade said. "I'm ready. Turn me." They did it that night, in the beach house with the sound of waves outside. Silvius explained the process, his blood, her blood, the death and rebirth that would follow. It would hurt. She'd wake transformed, hungry, different. "I'll be with you through all of it," he promised, "and when you wake up, I'll teach you everything you need to know. You won't be alone." Jade kissed him. "I know. I trust you." The turning was every bit as painful as he'd warned, like dying from the inside out. But through it all, she felt Silvius's presence, his voice anchoring her, his hand steady. And when she woke 3 days later, the world had changed. Colors were sharper, sounds were clearer. She could hear Silvius's heartbeat from across the room, slow and steady and ancient. And when she looked at her hands, her skin had paled to the same luminous white as his, her hair bleaching to silver white. "How do you feel?" Silvius asked. Jade stood, testing her new body, the strength and speed that hummed beneath her skin. She felt powerful, dangerous, free in a way she'd never imagined. "Alive," she said, and laughed at the irony. "More alive than I've ever been." They spent months at the coast while she adjusted, learning to hunt, to control the bloodlust, to navigate immortality. Silvius was patient and thorough, and Jade discovered she had a gift for the transformation, adapting quickly, maintaining control, finding the balance between human thought and vampire instinct. When they finally returned to the city, to the house that had been her sanctuary and was now her home, in truth, she felt complete. She'd started as a prisoner, become a survivor, and now she was something new entirely, a vampire, a partner to a king, a woman who'd chosen her own fate and won. The Eastern court welcomed her with ceremonies and formalities that made her head spin. Silvius presented her as his consort, his equal, and the court accepted it because he was their king, and his word was law. Jade took to the politics surprisingly well, her years of careful observation in her father's house translating into an ability to navigate vampire society. They worked together to modernize the court's laws, particularly around human-vampire relationships and consent. No more arranged marriages without both parties' agreement. No more humans being traded like property. It became their joint mission, and Jade found purpose in it, using her own story to change systems, to make sure what had been done to her couldn't be done to others. Decades passed. The world changed around them, technology advancing, societies shifting, but Jade and Silvius remained constant. They loved fiercely and fought rarely, building a partnership that was the envy of the vampire world. Other courts looked to them as an example, the king and the former prisoner who'd become his queen in all but name. On the 50th anniversary of the night they'd met, they stood together in the music room of their house. Silvius played the same Chopin nocturne he'd played for her when she was still human, still mortal, still afraid. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked when the last note faded. "Choosing this? Choosing me?" Jade came to sit beside him on the piano bench, taking his hand. "Never. Not once. You gave me everything, Silvius, freedom, love, purpose, forever. How could I regret that? I worried you might miss it. Being human, growing old, having the life you might have had. The life I might have had was locked in a house, married to someone I didn't choose, living and dying without ever really being free," Jade said. "This life, the one I have with you, this is everything I never knew I could want. I chose it, and I'd choose it again every single day." He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, listening to the slow rhythm of his ancient heart. Outside, the city hummed with life, cars and voices, and all the sounds of the modern world. But in here, in this house with doors that unlocked from the inside, with windows that opened wide, with love that had survived decades and would survive centuries more in here, there was only peace. "Tell me again," Silvius murmured, "how we met." Jade smiled. It was a ritual they'd developed over the years, retelling their beginning like a story, making it new each time. "I fled my father's locked house at midnight," she began, and he picked up the thread. "And you collided with me in the fog. And you asked, 'Who hurt you?' And you trusted me enough to answer. And you fought for me when no one else would. And you fought for yourself when it mattered most. And we fell in love. And we built a life. And we lived," Jade finished softly, "happily, together, forever." Silvius kissed her temple, a gesture of such tenderness it made her heart ache even after all these years. "The best story I know." "Mine too." They sat together in the music room as night deepened outside, two vampires with white skin and silver hair and immortal lives stretched out before them. The house around them was warm with light, every door unlocked, every window open to the world, and Jade, who had once known only cages and locks and fear, was finally, fully, completely free. Free to choose her own path, free to love who she wanted. Free to live the life she'd fought for, beside the vampire king who'd asked the right question and then given her every answer she'd needed. The story that had started with running and fear and locked doors had become something else entirely. A story of love, of freedom, of two people who'd found each other in the dark and built a light that would last forever. And they lived in that light, together, for all the centuries that followed, building a court based on consent and choice, helping others find their freedom the way Jade had found hers, growing and changing and loving through an immortal life that was richer than anything either of them had imagined. Sometimes on quiet nights, Silvius would ask Jade if she missed being human, and every time she would take his hand and tell him the truth, that she'd never been more human than she was now, that humanity wasn't about mortality or warmth or a beating heart. It was about choice, about compassion, about fighting for what mattered. And she had all of that. She'd had it from the moment she'd climbed out that window and run into the fog. From the moment a vampire king had looked at her broken, bleeding hands and asked, "Who hurt you with such gentleness that it changed everything?" The world kept turning. The years became decades, became centuries. And through it all, Jade and Silvius remained partners, lovers, friends, rulers of a court that valued freedom above all else. Because that was what Jade had learned, what she'd fought for, what she'd won. That freedom was the most precious thing in any world, mortal or immortal. And love, freely chosen, freely given, was the only kind worth having. She'd fled her father's locked house at midnight, terrified and alone. She'd found a vampire king who'd asked the right question, and together they'd built a forever worth living. That was their story, and it was still being written, would be written for centuries to come, in every unlocked door and open window, in every choice freely made, in every moment of love shared between two people who'd chosen each other against all odds. The beginning had been pain and fear and running into the dark, but the middle and the end, those were all light, all choice, all love. And Jade, standing in the house that was hers, beside the vampire who was hers, living the immortal life she'd chosen, Jade was happy. Finally, fully, forever happy, and that was everything.